I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. What is up, everybody? Random Man here, bringing you my review for On the Basis of Sex. Based on the life and early cases of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, played by Felicity Jones, the plot basically follows her struggles for equal rights and what led her to overcome all that to become a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Going into this movie, I had quite a bit of interest to see it, mainly for its subject matter and how that subject matter would be portrayed on screen. Again, this movie is based on the early life of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg before she got to that position, and as many of her younger fans, such as myself, will say, she is a dissenting badass, also known as the notorious RBG. Last year, we got a documentary based on the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg called RBG, which is one of my favorite documentaries of 2018. I thought this was so insightful, got me to learn a bunch of things about this amazing woman that I never knew prior to seeing the film. So seeing that a biopic based on Ruth Bader Ginsburg was being made, that did interest me quite a bit. Now, technically, On the Basis of Sex is a 2018 film release. It got a limited release back on Christmas Day of last year, but now this weekend, actually, it is getting its nationwide release, at least here in the US. And like I said, I was interested quite a bit to see how Felicity Jones, an actress I greatly admire, would portray Ruth Bader Ginsburg along with the rest of the cast, and how some of her early life would be portrayed. Starting out with the cast and their performances, we again have Felicity Jones as RBG herself, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, I love Felicity Jones as an actress. I loved her in her Oscar-nominated role of Jane Hawking in The Theory of Everything. I also really dug her in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, proving that she is capable of those action kind of roles. And now here, back in another biopic, I thought she did a very good job as Ginsburg. What I think Jones did an especially strong job of doing in portraying RBG was capturing the tenacity and feistiness that she had, and not just establishing herself as a woman to be taken seriously as a lawyer or involved with the law in general, but also as someone trying to fight for equality for all, not just for women, but also for men, as it is personified with the first case that she takes on. And this also has to do a lot with how she interacts with other characters here. She really does back up how ferocious she is in both an overt and subtle way in being the dissenting badass we all know and love her to be. There's also Armie Hammer as Martin Ginsburg, aka Marty, the loving husband to RBG. Now, the RBG documentary, I thought, did an especially exemplary job of portraying the romance between Marty and Ruth as so kinetic and just so absorbing. While watching the documentary, I was just so into the romance and relationship that these two had. And here in On the Basis of Sex, I think Armie Hammer not only did a really solid job in portraying Marty, but also the chemistry that he had between himself and Jones was so synergetic. I really bought them as this couple, and really, I think Hammer would do Marty proud. In fact, the real life RBG was quite a fan of Hammer's portrayal of Marty, so that's the biggest compliment one can give anybody in portraying a real life subject like him. Others in the supporting cast include the likes of Justin Theroux as Mel Wolfe, an old associate of RBG's at the ACLU. I thought he did a solid job here. Kathy Bates as Dorothy Kenyon, a lawyer and feminist activist who RBG is a fan of. She's more of a glorified cameo than a full-on supporting role, as she's really in only 2 small scenes here and there, but it's Kathy Bates. I love Kathy Bates as well. She did a good job. There's also Sam Waterston as Erwin Griswold, the Dean of Students at Harvard Law, where RBG and Marty do attend, and he's a more villainous character giving not just RBG but other female students at Harvard Law a hard time. And really, he's a looming presence across the rest of the movie as well for RBG when she does take on her first legal case. He is an A-list performer here, and I thought the performance that he gave off here basically was something that did fit the bill for the movie. There's also Kaylee Spaney as Jane Ginsburg, the first child of Ruth and Marty, and she has a bigger role than I expected her to have, as she is someone who is a child of her generation. I mean that in the sense of how when the movie does go to 1970 and she is a teenager, she is really somebody who is for power to all the people and all that kind of thing. And I thought for a young performer, she did a nice job. There's also Jack Rayner as an opposing figure going up against Ruth and Marty for Ruth's first legal case. And I thought he did a fine job here. He really wasn't in it that much. He really only shows up in the second half of the film. But really, the performances across the board, I think everyone does a good job with their roles, but a specific note has to go to Felicity Jones as RBG herself and even Armie Hammer as Marty. The writing in this film from Daniel Stiepelman definitely sets up this narrative to be one where it goes from the very beginning of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legal career as the movie opens up in 1956 at the first moments where RBG steps foot onto Harvard's law school. And all the while, she is already married to Marty. They already had their first child, Jane. And also, Marty goes through a bit of struggles himself with his health as he is stricken with cancer. And we see Ruth trying to juggle her own coursework with Marty's coursework. Then as the movie progresses, the film eventually jumps to the early 1970s where Ruth is already someone who is past school and is trying to get a leg up upon her legal career. And then it doesn't take long for her to get her first legal case where it does have to do with gender discrimination on the basis of sex, as the movie's title implies, to where it doesn't just go for females at the time, but also men at the time, as she is defending a male who is caring for his elderly mother, yet never married or had kids. In the way the movie is structured, it does go for the approach that a lot of biopics of recent memory have opted for, in choosing a specific moment of a famous figure's life and focusing on that for the majority of the film. And really, that kind of approach I have been mostly a fan of for a lot of movies. And with this one focusing on RBG, the movie did a noteworthy job in going through all of the various struggles that Ginsburg had to go through. Females were not taken seriously when becoming lawyers, and this is something that Ginsburg is legendary for, and proving all the naysayers wrong. To my recollection, the RBG doc from last year did cover this specific court case that On the Basis of Sex does have within its narrative, and it covered it quite well within the documentary. So seeing this be expanded upon a bit more within this biopic did interest me and engage me for the most part. One thing that does have to be said with the writing, though, is that though it does follow a similar structure that other biopics of recent memory have covered, it also falls into some trappings where it does feel safe. It feels like a standard kind of portrayal of someone such as RBG, to where, yes, she does go through the gender discrimination that she did go through in real life, and that is emphasized a lot throughout the film, but also in just going for that kind of drama to where, yeah, it all comes to a head by the end. One could say this is comparable, at least to me, to another biopic of recent memory, and that is the Freddie Mercury / Queen biopic Bohemian Rhapsody, where that felt like a very sanitized and not too deep look at its subject matter. Though, to me, the difference between that and On the Basis of Sex was that with Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's sticking out in my mind of the unsure nature of the film and it not knowing where to focus itself on between Freddie's life and his involvement with Queen. With On the Basis of Sex, it was a lot more consistent, I feel. Again, it is the by-the-numbers approach that we've seen for other true life stories turned into movies. It felt more even than Bohemian Rhapsody in how it told its story. Plus, it wasn't as overtly inaccurate as Bohemian Rhapsody, as the inaccuracies of that film didn't bother me in the sense that they were in the film, but they undermined the drama and really took away from the actual tragedy of the real life story of Freddie Mercury by its end. Speaking of historical inaccuracies, On the Basis of Sex did come under a bit of controversy after one trailer for it came out, to where at the end of it, a federal judge in the first case that RBG is a part of tells her the word woman does not appear once in the US Constitution, to which Ginsburg rebuttals, nor does the word freedom. That caused some people to raise some eyebrows and look up if that is the case, and the word freedom does show up. That got quite a few people riled up. And for me, seeing that line be said in context of the scene towards the end of the movie, yeah, it's historically inaccurate, but it didn't bother me that much because it was a part of what RBG was trying to say in getting her stance known and ultimately trying to win her case. And really, I think the movie stays pretty faithful to the spirit of RBG. Also keeping up with the faithfulness of the spirit of RBG is the direction by Mimi Leder, and I thought that she was able to keep just about every scene in this movie focused on what it is, as the majority of this movie is comprised of talking scenes and a lot of dialogue. And in conjunction with the writing, I thought it was believable, and it did really feel like that this was a younger Ruth Bader Ginsburg, portrayed by Jones, getting all of this done. Other things I personally enjoyed with this movie on a technical scale has to do with the costumes. I loved all the outfits that RBG wore across this movie. They looked pretty accurate to what the real life Ginsburg wore back then. I thought it was well shot, well edited, and well scored. Even the pacing of the movie, though it runs at about 2 hours, I never really found myself that bored while watching it. There are some slower scenes in this movie that, again, do go back into how this movie is mostly comprised of people talking, or specifically RBG going around and talking to various characters. But really, this goes to show what the real life Ginsburg had to do, not just for this court case, but also in trying to do all the good for the US and future generations. And that really has been personified and exemplified to today with the RBG doc coming out last year, and On the Basis of Sex really hoping to inspire everyone. By the way, as a bit of a side note, I do hope more young people see this film, as it is PG-13, but when I got to the theater, I was carded for this film, and as you can see on this ticket stub, it says that it was rated R, even though I thought it was PG-13. Oh well, I hope other theaters do clarify that this movie is suitable for preteens and teenagers alike. On the Basis of Sex definitely backs up the sentiment I already had on the now 85-year-old dissenting badass known as RBG. That being said, though, if you do want to get a more complete and all the more well-told portrayal of who she is as a person, I highly recommend watching the RBG documentary, as you get a more full picture on who she is and also the various court cases that she was involved with. It's also a more tightly strung together movie, running at about a half hour shorter than this biopic. Fans of Ginsburg are no doubt going to get into On the Basis of Sex to get more of their RBG fill, and on its own, I do think that it is a good biopic. It is worthwhile to see for the performances alone, in my opinion, and to see history be portrayed in a narrative sense. For all of what I've said and more, I recommend On the Basis of Sex. My final verdict for On the Basis of Sex is 3.5 out of 5 stars. thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of On the Basis of Sex. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.